Today, we're going to be talking about the celestial elves that were recently revealed in the Dragon Prince Book 6, after being first brought up back in Book 5. My name is Timeblind Deepcut, and welcome back to Cartoon Universe. Now, in the world of the Dragon Prince, there are 6 types of elves: Moonshadow, Skywing, Tidebound, Earthblood, Sunfire, and, of course, the Star-Touched elves. The first 5 species are what we would call terrestrial elves, species that developed in Zadia. But the Star-Touched elves are elven beings who came from the stars, who can incarnate in physical form whenever their stars align over the skies of Zadia. The celestial elves, interestingly, are not star-touched elves, but as Callum's book explains, they are an ancient faction of Skywing elves who don't focus so much on the sky itself as the stars beyond it. Now, generally, we think of each elven species as sharing a basic culture. Moonshadow elves, for instance, live together in the Silver Grove. They draw power from the moon, and its changing phases inspires their power of illusion. This has generally made them great warriors and assassins, people who pledge themselves not just to their own missions, but to those that help all of Zadia. Earthblood elves have the power to blend in with different types of earthly nature and are generally found in a few key forests. Tidebound elves are naturally not just drawn to the sea, but tend to live out in the key bodies of water around Zadia to avoid interacting with humans and even other elves. The Sunfire elves are known for their combat and war, but specifically using their fire powers to become expert craftsmen and metalsmiths and create excellent weaponry. Like the elves before, they have typical homelands where they gather together, but they aren't bound to some location, and part of the Dragon Prince story is about their history and migration and changes to society. Unlike the predecessors, however, the Skywing elves aren't known for staking out any territories for their communities, and among the elves, they have the least sense of community or attachment among each other. With real-life humans, some settle down and some are nomadic, so it makes sense that at least one species of elf would be more focused on travel. And it makes sense to me that it would be the Skywing elves. A lot of the primal sources create a place for the actual elves to gather around, but that isn't really the case with the Skywing elves. For them, literally all of the sky is their home, and that makes really all of the world their home. Sure, they tend to stay away from the human kingdoms in the west, but due to their detachment from the other elves and even each other, they are apparently the least hostile elves towards humans out of all the different species. The Skywing elves are also interesting because they seem to have a big fracture in their species beyond even the separation from the celestial elves. Just as we see in the show, there are 2 kinds of Skywing elves, the ones that have wings and the ones that don't. The Skywing elves with wings are only 1 in 10, making them something of a rare evolutionary offshoot within their species, though some others, even more rare, can also grow wings using magic. This implies to me that magic-based evolution is happening with these elves, and since the Skywing elves don't group together in communities, certain divergent traits may be more expected to arise, becoming rare in just one location at first, before becoming the key trait for just half the species or so. I believe in an early interview we did with Ihaz and Richmond that they explained that elves initially had no primal source, but instead began to develop their primal connection based on what they lived close to, though I can't quite find the interview where this was said. Over hundreds and thousands of years, the elves could go from generally mystical beings with very little power in any particular element, to focus on how well they can lean into one element in particular as those elves began thriving in their regions, and their descendants became the dominating force there. There is no real on or off point for that particular primal affiliation, it would seem, but rather over the course of long periods of time, organisms with a natural ability to tap into that tend to conquer their corner of nature. This is potentially important because the Skywing elves may be the closest thing we have to an evolution towards terrestrial elves becoming star-touched, since the star-touched elves, as we said, are not actually born in Zadia themselves. The actual star-touched elves live so long that they are believed to be the guiding force of evolution for the other species of Zadia, particularly the other elves, but at least one faction of the Skywing elves seems to be growing close to them. A lot of the primal sources are already centered around the sky. Moonshadow elves get power from the moon, Sunfire elves from the sun, but the Skywing elves more so represent the atmosphere than the bodies of heaven. Despite that, the Celestial Elves are a faction of Skywing Elves who I would say are developing perhaps to one day have the stars as their primal source, though who knows how long that would take. The Celestial Elves are Skywing Elves who, in the very deep past, decided to live together as a community. Not the first to ever do this, but it was for very unique purposes. These Skywing elves from a very early time had decided to live with a focus on the stars over the sky as a whole, so much so that they refuse to even look at the sky or see the world around them unless it comes from the light of stars only. This means no sun and even no moon, and a cloudy night covering the stars ruins the entire thing. Despite being an ancient faction, this tribe has some members that have natural wings, and others that don't. For thousands of years now, this group of elves have been living in isolation from the others, honing not just their connection to the stars, but their ability to see without sight. The moonless night is only once a month with a new moon, and even then, the use of vision is done for the sake of spiritual enlightenment, not for their daily tasks. The Star Scraper provides a place that is safe enough for these elves to have managed to live blindfolded their entire lives when the sky ends up being covered for hundreds of years by storm clouds. The connection to the stars is so powerful that some of the elves are able to become time blind, such as we see happen to Cosmo. Being this gifted with a connection to the stars is more rare, similar to how wings in Skywing elves itself is rare, apparently only 1 in 10. Over hundreds or maybe even thousands of years, I imagine that the primal connection of the celestial elves could lean towards the stars instead of the sky, making them a distinct new class of elf that is different from the star-touched elves from above, but still with a primal connection to the stars and different from the Skywing elves around them. Very few species in Zadia are connected to the stars in particular, and I imagine it's possible that different species of elves could evolve to another primal over time. The key celestial elves we end up talking to are of course the Great Elder, who has lived for over 300 years, being on the longer end of lifespans for elves in Zadia. Then there is the next generation, which includes Astrid and Cosmo, who are sister and brother. Cosmo is interesting for a lot of reasons, some of them already discussed in this video, but the first thing fans noticed about him was that he seems to have vitiligo, which can be seen not just to affect his skin, but also his horns, creating patches of bright color there as well. The Celestial Elves have a strong focus on prophecy and the idea of the fates, but they don't believe everything is set in stone. The point of the gift of prophecy is that it allows you to see the problems that are coming, some that are destined by the motion of the planets and stars, and others that are coming due to cycles of behavior that living organisms get caught up in. While they can't do something to stop the cosmic events from happening like the storm that covers the sky, they can prepare themselves for it because of their foreknowledge. Additionally, being time blind allows Cosmo to navigate different potential outcomes for humans and elves. He's able to not just see the future, but to see advice his own sister will give him in the future based on what he does wrong with his power. This allows him to try out different paths that he believes will be in the best interest for Callum. In the past, time-blind celestial elves didn't just see the storm was coming, but that it would be ended by a human mage and a warrior elf. This would have been an interesting prophecy at the time, as humans were not known for magic, having been banished to the west specifically because they were only using dark magic, something considered a threat to the other elves. Callum, however, is the first actual human to practice magic by tapping into the actual primal sources, at least that we know of. A unique thing to be looking out for in addition to an elf warrior coming along with him. The prophecy about Callum and Rayla was vaguely worded, however, and said with metaphor, indicating not a true piercing and melting of a monster's heart, but rather a therapeutic and symbolic piercing and melting of the heart. It is Rayla's compassion that made it possible for her to see how they could help the beast instead of hurt it, and a lot of how prophecy works in the show will follow this pattern, I imagine, as we explore it more in Book 7. As we get into the 7th and final season of the series, prophecy will likely play a bigger role, and much like the actual information of star-touched elves like Erebos, the star-based prophecies that might pop up will likely have one meaning that seems grave for our characters, but then a truer meaning that will turn out to be in the best interest for everyone by the end of the show. While time-blind, the stars allow Cosmo to see into the souls of people around him. The first thing he notes is how beautiful his sister is, but he isn't saying that about her physically, even though this is the first time he's seen her, but rather he's saying this because he's starting to see her soul based on what the stars see, the eyes of the sky as they are referred to. It is in this state that he notes that Astrid has become the person she was always meant to be, claiming her star was once hidden. While Cosmo's first comment to Astrid was very much about her star, the shock he saw when seeing her physically coupled with this comment has indicated that, like Terry, Astrid is an elf that transitioned from her gender assigned at birth. In addition to Astrid, Cosmo can see the light of Rayla, which indeed shines very bright, but when he looks into Callum, he only sees darkness. The Celestial Elves, thankfully, have a ceremony for this, and it's one that the youngest generation seems well acquainted with. While they do not use their eyes when the moon is out, they are still able to indulge in the use of the stars and their magic, even when there is a full moon it would seem, as long as they keep those on. Callum himself is able to perform the ritual while Cosmo and Astrid keep their new blindfolds on, which after that first moonless night for them, contain new star symbols that indicate a sort of initiation into this aspect of their culture. Callum is given his own blindfold for this, indicating it's something that other Celestial Elves may have done even without having done dark magic that needed to be cleansed. This ritual is used to find your light and fill your soul with that light, and might be one of the earliest things that Celestial Elves do, even without having a moonless night, in order to help them connect with the stars. This is something of a Celestial Elf baptism, something that washes away whatever darkness you had from the material world and particularly from dark magic. Doing this, however, makes dark magic more likely to corrupt you if you use it again, which I imagine will be a plot in Season 7. Interestingly, this ritual seems to have a similar effect to the one that the Sunfire Elves intended to use on Viren back in Season 3 Episode 7, which they said would only cleanse the parts of him that were tainted by dark magic before Erebos took over the show. Of course, Callum and Rayla didn't come here for a purification ceremony, but more so because Callum believed that they had access to the Nova Blade, a weapon that can kill star-touched elves. It would make sense that the Celestial Elves would have this, harnessing some of the star-based magic with this weapon. However, it wouldn't prevent Erebos from eventually returning. While it is the only thing known to kill a star-touched elf's physical body, the star-touched elves are not from Zadia, as we said, and instead come down to the planet whenever their stars properly align in the skies, even if the body is destroyed by a Nova Blade. This Nova Blade was also lost centuries ago, as these elves apparently gifted it to a human girl, which I imagine to be the Orphan Queen, a distant ancestor of Ezran, but again, more on that in another video. This wraps up today's video, however. Before we go, I also wanted to point out that some fans seem to think that the dark staff that Erebos gave Zard can be seen in the background of the Celestial Elf Starscraper, where we see a whole bunch of magic staffs, all of them with a very similar design, but with different colors. As of now, I'm not entirely sure what this means or what they could be used for, but since they already have to harness the power of the stars, being Skywing Elves only, they might have access to these magic staffs that help them access other types of magic as well, though not particularly dark magic. But what do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, or share your thoughts with other Dragon Prince fans over in the Cartoon Universe Discord server. Link in the pinned comment down below, and I'll see you next time. Or hear you, since I wear this blindfold all the time now.